Hey, how's it going everyone? Well, in the video, the ProQuest season is kind of approaching rapidly. It may even, is already a ProQuest anywhere in the world right now, I'm not sure, but in my case I will be going to my first ProQuest this weekend. And I want to have a little bit of a short video about how to approach some of these top decks out there. Currently, decks that I consider top decks are Katsu, Lexi, Dray, Bravo over here, and Icelander. I think those are the ones that you're going to be facing the most. Of course, there are decks like Icelander that are going to try and do Icelander things, but I think for the most part, you can't really prepare against an Icelander deck other than maybe playing something like a Warmonger's Diplomacy, because if they're going to high roll you with the red on the ledgers that's coming in for 15 dominate, there isn't a whole lot you can do if you are a go white deck. If you're a Bravo yourself, of course, it's not really going to be an issue. But there are a lot of cards in these decks, and I think the way that Flesh and Blood works has shifted a little bit. Like in the past, you have a lot of these very high value calculations that you try to outvalue your opponent with these incremental bits of value here and there. But because we have a lot of these really spiky games nowadays where you draw your big bump and then you go out from value from that, like a Tree of a Kind, my approach to playing Flesh and Blood has changed a little bit, and it has been rather successful for me. And the thing that I'm doing now is I just try to outvalue the opponent with my attacks while focusing my blocks on a specific few cards that I know are going to really give them an extreme amount of value. In Bravo's case, the cards that I'm personally always looking out for to counter are things like the Crippling Crush, because if this hits with 4 more damage and you need to discard 2 cards, that's just too much value on their side. Is going to completely ruin your turn. So generally speaking, if I'm up against a Bravo player, I will side in 3 Reinforced Alliance and something like 3 Sink Belows or 3 Flick Flags if I'm playing the Ninja deck. But you need to have like 6 defense reaction like things in your deck to be able to stop something like the Crippling Crush specifically. Of course, if they have Pummel alongside it, there is not a whole lot you can do. Like if they are gonna pummel the Crippling Crush, usually if this is dominated, you will not have anything available to stop it. But sometimes they kind of show that they have the pummel. When they don't give this dominate, then it's probably time to overblock it and stop yourself from taking damage, because you're not going to be having a turn for yourself anyway. But try to block at least 8 out of this damage. You can usually do that with an equipment, 1 block from a card and then a defense reaction, and then you're safe. And the same thing goes for Starstruck. Like Starstruck, this one says if it deals 4 more damage, then during the next turn you cannot play attacks with a base of right. You have to play attacks with a base that are greater than the damage dealt. So if you take 10 damage from this, naturally you will not be able to do anything during your turn. So again, this one, you need to stop at least 7 of that damage to be able to stop that from going through. Generally not that difficult. You block with something for 3, you throw a defense reaction on top of that and you're good to go. But if you don't see your defense reactions against Bravo, you can get a little bit of trouble. So another thing that you need to look out for is the Icelander turns. So what they generally do is they play Icelander, give +1 and dominate to the next attack, and then if it hits you need to discard 2 cards. But they combine this with something like the Anatos. So they pitch for the Icelander, they pitch for the Anatos, and the Anatos is coming in for 6, +1 from the Icelander, 7 dominate. And then you're in a bit of trouble, because if this hits then you need to discard. So again, you need to have a defense reaction ready for something like this, or a bit of equipment. So against Bravo, it's also important to have like a 1 block equipment, like either your boots or something, and like 4 blocks worth of equipment in other slots is important, because if you have those, generally speaking, you should be able to stop some big turns for them. Of course, they are going to have to pummel sometimes, but you need to kind of keep in mind, do they have resources to be able to pummel? And if they do, you might need to play around that, maybe even throw your whole hand just in front of the attack to avoid the pummel. What I like to do if they do have a pummel is I like to block in such a way that I keep one card in hand to kind of lure the pommel out of their arsenal. Then they don't get as much value in terms of damage from the pommel. Maybe they only deal like 1 or 2 damage, and you still need to discard that last card, but then at least the pommel is gone and you don't need to keep playing around it the whole time. Generally speaking, they only run 3 pommels. Some Bravo lists out there also run the blue pommels. I think this one right there doesn't, and I've seen some very brave Bravos that even run like 1 or 2 yellow pommels, but generally speaking you only need to look out for the 3 red pommels and you should be good to go. So the next deck, so Dromai, I personally, I don't feel I'm in the position to give much advice on Dromai, simply because I'm a ninja main player, so most of the decks that I play are aggro-centric, so my matchup against Dromai has been quite good in general. What I do as ninja is I use my Kodachis to keep the small dragons off the field, and then I use a big attack to get rid of the big dragons. But I think for people that have something like Azalea, for example, that only has 1 attack to attack in with, I think dealing with the dragons is not going to win you the race. So I almost feel if you're up against a Dromai player and you are not navigating a hero that can easily deal with the dragons by removing them off the field, you might need to take a choice very early on if you just want to try to high roll the Dromai players, because if you have back-to-back red and ledgers, then they're not going to be able to do much. Of course, there are some key dragons that you do want to get off the field, like the ones that draw them cards, which is at the Caloria, for example. Let's see if we can flip this to the back. So when Caloria hits, they gain control of an item they control. If they don't, they get to draw a card. This can give them a significant amount of value. If they have some really big dragon like the Tumultai on the field, for example, that can attack in for 5 every turn, then obviously you want to get rid of something like that too. But other than that, I think it might be best to just rely on Phantasm Poppers, like siding in some Command and Conquers or some other 6 higher attacks and trying to stop that turn like that. And then just trying to maximum value attack them for several turns in a row straight to the face until they're in a position that they're pretty much blocking with their full hand, and try to high roll the game from there. It's not efficient. Like, I feel there is, how to say, like, there is no proper way of approaching Dromai, because they generate so much value that you're almost forced to deal with the dragons. But then if you're busy dealing with the dragons, then you give them the freedom to just continue their game plan. So they just keep spitting out more dragons until eventually you don't have anything left in your deck. And in the meantime, they just keep on poking you for damage anyway. So you're losing damage, and at the same time you're losing tempo, and you're also losing your deck in a way. So I feel Dromai is a bit of a tough matchup for most heroes, but I feel if you don't give her enough time to set up and you just high roll her as soon as possible, then you should be in a decent spot. Or again, if you're an aggro deck, just deal with the dragons and keep on poking some damage her way every single turn. Next up, Lexi. Lexi is a bit tough, because if Lexi gets things like the Tree of a Kind early and she starts value spiking with those, then it's very hard to catch up. Like, if they can get Tree of a Kind on turn 2, for example, and they can already spike a huge amount of value with that, then there's not that much you can do. But generally speaking, most of the things that Lexi has nowadays is pretty damage oriented. Like, if you look at things like Infecting Shot, for example, yes, it comes in for 5 and you do get the Blood Rot Pox token, so basically this is like a 7 damage arrow if you let the Blood Rot Pox token, that's a mouthful, to hit. Same with things like the Searing Shot, like this is pretty much a 5 damage arrow coming in for 4, you get 1 additional damage if it hits, and then they try to spike the damage a little bit by using things like Rain Razors. The thing about blocking Lexi is that if they have the Rain Razors in hand and they use the Rain Razors, then even if you're blocking something like an Infecting Shot for 6, for example, it's still going to be hitting and you're still going to get that Blood Rot Pox token anyway. So in a lot of scenarios, I feel like if you have the tempo and you have a good hand and you are able to present like 15 to 20 damage in your next turn, it might be best to just take the damage, take the 7, even though it's a lot of value on their side, so that during your turn you can just push 15 to 20 back. But because the sooner you can get Lexi to the under 10 life range that they need to start blocking with cards from the hand, then the value that they can present really goes down significantly. One arrow though that you do need to be particularly careful with is the endless arrow, simply because if this one keeps returning to the hand, it's kind of endless value for them, right? Because then they will always have an arrow to attack in with. So the endless arrows you need to block no matter what. Like if they attack for 4, you block for 6, so you can play around the rain razors. And another thing that you need to try to block, I would say the Heat Seekers are also a card that you're looking to block if you can, simply because if the Heat Seeker hits, then they can put the card on from the top of the deck into the arsenal. Usually that's an arrow because of the high consistency of arrows in the deck in general. So you might want to block this one as well with maybe an equipment and a tree block if you know that they cannot rain razors. But it's a tough choice. Like I've been against a lot of Lexis where I decided to just block the endless arrows and things like the Bolden Shot to deny them a reload. By the way, be careful. If they already have a card in the arsenal, the reload doesn't work. I've seen a lot of Lexis, maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally cheating with this, that they have a card in hand that hits and then they try to put a card from the hand into the arsenal. It doesn't work like that. It says if you have no cards in your arsenal, 0, you may put a card from your hand face on the arsenal. So don't let people cheat against you with the Bolden Shot. If they already have something in the arsenal with the New Horizon, don't let them reload another time. They cannot do that. Then we have Drill Shot. This one puts a -1 counter on equipment you control. It's annoying, yes, but at the same time, you can easily play around this. Like it's a 4 attack. If your equipment is really important, you can always throw a 6 in front of that to play around a rain razors. Nowadays the Lexis are also running lightning presses. I've even seen lists that run 3 lightning press, so do be careful about that. And there are a mix of decks, like some run the premeditate, some run 2 premeditate. I think 2 premeditate is the most popular at the moment, but you also have lists that run 0 premeditates and they just go all out on the arrow plan to try and get the maximum value out of a Heat Seeker and potentially things like the Quiver of Rustling Leaves to put an arrow from the top of the deck into the arsenal. So that's something to look out for. But yeah, just make sure endless arrow doesn't hit. And if they come in with a high value arrow, just look at your hand and see if you can outvalue them during that turn, because the longer the game goes on against Lexi, the more likely you're going to lose, because eventually they are going to massively outvalue you with the 3 of a kinds, and you just don't want to give them that opportunity. So it's better to outvalue them in the early game to force them to start blocking, so then the late game they don't get as much value out of these stupid things. Like if something had to be banned in Lexi, in my opinion, should have been 3 of a kind and maybe the Voltaire. Like, yeah, I see a lot of people complain that if she doesn't have Voltaire, then the deck falls apart, but I think the Shiver is just fine. Really, the Shiver can already do so much. Like if you run Shiver in combination with Snap, for example, what's it called, Snapshot, that allows you to activate the Shiver an additional time, you already have a lot of value there. Or even with the Death Dealer, we've seen some very fun Death Dealer Lexi builds that are very powerful and very combo centering, but are really meta warping in the way that the Voltaire is. Also, if the opponent is running the Trench of Sunken Treasures, and you do run a Warmonger's Diplomacy in your deck, you need to be careful, because they can activate this at instant speed to get rid of whatever is in the arsenal. So the Warmonger's Diplomacy is not so good against a Lexi if you're trying to lock them out of a turn. They already are playing around that, so Warmonger's Diplomacy is not as good as it used to be. So keep that in mind. Arctic Incarceration, this is just a instant time warp for them. If they play this on you, they're probably going to be getting an additional turn anyway. The good thing about Arctic Incarceration is that if they flip it with Lexi, you know it's gonna come. You know they're going to use it, so generally speaking, you in those turns that you know that you're not going to have a turn anyway, you just block with your full hand, and then in the next turn they probably have to play it out of the arsenal to free up that slot. So you do lose 2 turns, but you just block with your full hand 2 turns in a row, and then you're back in the game. It does allow them to go like 8 cards deep to find the tree of a kind, but it's better to just like this is just such a strong card. Like 3 Frostbites is so powerful in the current Flesh and Blood format, especially because the decks are so streamlined, so usually you only have 1 blue in hand to play with. So try and not give them too much value into incarcerations. If they flip it and you know it's gonna come, just try to outplay it a bit by blocking a bit more than you would. So next up we have Icelander. Icelander, well, this is the value queen in Flesh and Blood right now. I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of Icelander. It's not as popular as it used to be. However, the way that I personally approach this matchup, if they put the Channel Lake Frigid down, I just keep on blocking, because I feel there's no point playing into this additional cost. It's just going to lose you the game in general. And also, since we know that Icelander plays cards from the arsenal and gives you a Frostbite, something that a Icelander player tends to be looking out for is that you play an attack and you still have 1 resource floating, because that's the moment when they load you out with a Frostbite, meaning that your next attack you need to be pitching for regardless. So the way to play around this is that you, when you attack, either make sure that you have 2 resources floating or 0 resources floating, because it makes the decision making on the Icelander side a lot harder on when to load you out with a Frostbite. So that's something that at least a lot of Icelander players that I played against, they were complaining against me, like, you never give me a good window to give you a Frostbite, because you try to outplay it a bit. You can manipulate it a bit by blocking in a way that you're always holding up resources or 0 resources. Like, for example, if they attack in with the Fiandel's Fighting Spirit, you block with 2 cards, and then you keep the cards that make sure that you can keep some resources floating there. Also, if they have stuff with discard effects like the Aether Ice Vein, for example, so this one says if it's fused and it deals damage to any target, well, maybe this one's the wrong example. I think the red one is the more lethal one. If fused and deals damage, 5 damage is going to be dealing some damage anyway, right? You need to discard a card unless you pay 2. So how you go against this is that, generally speaking, you want to stop 1 of that damage, so you pitch a blue to avoid 1 of that arcane damage. And then you use the 2 remaining resources to pay for the discard cost. If they have something like an Insidious Chill already on the field, so this one says if they Ice Fuse, they can remove a Frost counter from this, and then you need to discard a card unless you pay 2. If they already have this on the field, then you can potentially pitch a blue, pay the 2, then if they're coming in with the Aether Ice Vein, you can stop 2 of that damage and then pitch another blue to pay for the other 2. So you do want to maximize your value there, but generally speaking, don't do stuff like pitching 3 to stop 3 of that damage and then having to pay the 2 anyway. Don't do that stuff. It's really low value, and that's kind of the game plan that they want to play to get you into in the first place. So don't play into that game plan. You want to keep pushing tempo to them every single turn. If you're a deck that has some big attacks like Command and Conquers, then it's kind of beneficial, because if you have 1 big attack, then you don't really need to worry about them loading you out with a Frostbite if you don't give them a window where they can react with something that gives Frostbite. So you just play a big attack straight away, and then you can easily play around the Frostbites that way. But Icelander's a tough deck to face, because if she can get all the value things to line up well for her, there's not really that much you can do. They can keep you under full control most of the game until they get you into that low life range where they can easily Amarita Scalding you into a Storm Striders into another one. So there's not much you can do. Just try to play the tempo game. Don't give them the windows of opportunity with the resources. So either keep 2 resource floating or 0, so that the Frostbites are not as powerful, and with discard effects, Always make sure that you have floating resources to pay for the discard after you pay for the damage, so that you don't lose as many cards, because each card you lose is like a 3 value loss on average, generally speaking at least. And then lastly we have Katsu. The way to combat Katsu, so Katsu has an ability that lets it fetch a combo piece straight from the deck. The best way to approach this matchup is just assuming, and I do mean assuming, that they don't have the full combo in hand. And usually they don't, usually they do need one of the attacks here to fetch a piece from the deck. So what you generally do is you will fully block a Surging Strike for 6, and then if they do have a Whelming Gustwave, for example, you fully block it as well, and then you just pray to the Flesh and Blood gods that they don't have the Bonds of Ancestry in hand already or have one in arsenal, because if they do, then they're just going to value spike and there's not a whole lot you can do. So they do run Ancestral Empowerment that can give +1 power to an attack. They run 3 of those. They also run 3 of a kind, usually 2 or 3, that can also push their attacks a little bit. So if you're blocking, you do need to keep in mind that they might push that damage by 1 additional, and you need to play kind of around that. So if they play something like a Be Like Water, you can easily just throw a Sink Below in front of that, for example, to be able to block 4, and then even with the +1 they cannot do much, and that turn kind of falls apart. And other than that, yeah, just block the Surging Strike, like fully block the Surging Strike for 6, try to block the Be Like Waters for 4, then if they come in with either a Whelming Gustwave for 4 or a Descendant Gustwave for 5, you try to block these for 5 or 6, and then if you have fully blocked that, then you should be good to go. Nowadays, Katsus, they run Double Strike, I run them as well. Double Strike, it comes in for 1, deals 1 damage, then they can usually trigger their Katsu ability to let them fetch the missing combo piece from the deck. So if they're coming in with a Double Strike turn, there is nothing you can do. There's seriously nothing you can do. Like you could block this with equipment if you have the equipment available, and then block the second one as well, but then usually they already have the Surging Strike. But yeah, I think that's all you can do. Like, try to double block this and then also double block the Surging Strike to stop the combo that way, because once they get the Bond of Ancestry rolling, it's a huge chunk of value, because this one lets them fetch something from the graveyard and then straight from the deck. So Bond of Ancestry usually is like an instant 8 value. If they have a second Descendant Gustwave available to them, then they can even start chaining Bonds of Ancestry back to back. Like the other day, I did a turn, like I think I had 1 of these in arsenal, I had 1 of these in my hand, and then I had 2 Bonds of Ancestry, I believe, and a blue if I'm not mistaken, and I was able to pull together such a massive turn where I pitched a blue Descendant Gustwave into Bonds of Ancestry, banishing a Descendant Gustwave, into Descendant Gustwave into Bonds of Ancestry, banishing another Bonds of Ancestry. So then at that point you can play another Descendant Gustwave into Bonds of Ancestry, into something like a Philosophist. Like, these kind of insane turns for Katsu, they do happen rather frequently. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Winds of Eternity, this one comes in for 4, and I see a lot of Katsu players, they don't mention the on-hit. So when this hits, shuffle all cards named 100 wins you own back into the deck. So if this hits, they can put all the 100 wins that just attack back into the deck. So sometimes it is kind of advisable to try and block this one, because if they have the 100 wins back in the deck, usually they can pull off a combo again with Bonds of Ancestry where they 100 wins, fetch another wins, 100 wins from the deck with the Bonds of Ancestry, and I play another 100 wins to come in for an additional 4, so you can play around that. And then we have the Dishonor plan. Well, Dishonor, I think the only thing you can do is to try and keep 4 block on your equipment free, because at the point that they play Dishonor, because you're already dealing with the Surging Strikes and the Whelming Gustwaves, if they do have Dishonor by going into the Descendant Gustwave line, I mean, then there's not really much you can do to stop the on-hit effect from happening, unless of course you have some equipment free. But usually if they're going to dishonor you, if they're lucky enough to pull off the combo, there is not a whole lot you can do. The only thing you can pray for is if you're playing a hero that doesn't really care about the hero abilities in general, but dishonor is very, very nasty. If it hits, then you cannot use your hero ability for the rest of the game. For things like Azalea, that's very important. I guess Lexi as well, if Lexi can no longer flip things in her arsenal, it can really ruin her day as well. So if you're up against a Lexi player, for example, try to get your dishonor off as soon as possible if you're playing a Katsu deck, because it can really cripple them a lot. And also Dromai, like if Dromai gets dishonored, there's not a whole lot that deck can do anymore. Usually a Dromai player is able to block something like this, though. They have a lot of block value available on their equipment, and sometimes they also run stuff like the what's called sand cover, something that can stop 4 damage. But if this is coming in under an Art of War, very hard to deal with, and if it hits, you're probably going to be winning the game. I see this list runs energy potions. I don't think that many Katsus run energy potions. Probably a tech against Icelander specifically if I'm looking at this list right here, but yeah, I think that's all I can share. So again, Katsu, it fetches combo pieces, it wants to go into Bonds of Ancestry, and this one will fetch another card to continue dealing a ton of damage, so you want to try and stop that. And I think those are all the important things. Ah yeah, and nowadays they run Breeze Rider Boots, that's also important. Breeze Rider Boots says if a ninja attack action card you control hits, you may destroy Breeze Rider Boots, and if you do, attack action cards with combo can go again this turn. Sometimes you will see a Katsu player keeping 3 cards in hand and then attacking with something like a Whelming Gust Wave. If they do that, then you can almost know for certain they have something like a Razor Reflex in hand in combination with something like an Ancestral Empowerment. My advice is, if they attack with a Whelming Gust Wave without anything else, you have 3 cards in hand, just block 7. If you block 7, you're playing around the Razor Reflex, and you're playing around a potential Art of War or a Ancestral Empowerment. If this doesn't hit, there's no way for them to give it go again. Like Razor Reflex can give it go again if it hits. The Breeze Rider Boots can give it go again if it hits. If they're running Breeze Rider Boots, just overblock these combo cards like this one. There's no point overblocking this one though, because this one already has go again by itself. So if they attack with the Descendant Gust Wave, you kind of just need to block it normally to try and stop them from getting a Katsu trigger. But if they come in with just a Whelming Gust Wave, you can very easily outdo them by just overblocking. Or you could even block 3 and keep a defense reaction in your arsenal. So if they do try to spike a +1 or +3 with Razor Reflex, you can sink below that and make it very hard for them to block that way. And I think that's all that I have to share with you all today. If you have some tips that I didn't mention, or you disagree with certain approaches, how I approach certain matchups, feel free to let people know down in the comments. I'm a decent player, but I'm not the best player, so if you want some really good pro advice for playing Flesh and Blood, you should probably be reaching out to like world champions or calling champions. They probably know a lot more about the game than I do, but I do have a significant win rate in Flesh and Blood in general. I think my overall win rate in Flesh and Blood is around 65 to 70%, so I do hold my ground fairly decently, even in big events. And yeah, I mean, that's all from me. If you love what I do and you want to have access to all my deck lists, or you want to have personal coaching or personal advice, you can always join my Patreon. The links are down in the description. And if you enjoy my content, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment down below, and I will see you all next time with another Flesh and Blood video. Anyway, take care.